Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating and honestly, kind of painful. We're taking a look at the actual mechanics of the human mind. We constantly hear that we need to be more self aware. It's pitched to us as this ultimate master key to a better life, stronger relationships, and career success. But if you've ever actually sat down and really tried to look closely at yourself, yeah, it's rarely a pleasant experience. In fact, it can be downright exhausting. So here's the big question we're tackling today, the real central paradox of personal growth. Does looking inward actually make us happier, or does it just make us totally miserable? It's a question that has literally baffled psychologists and philosophers for decades. I mean, you put in the effort, you analyze your thoughts, and yet sometimes you end up feeling way worse than when you started. And hey, if you've ever felt that way, you are definitely not alone. I came across this deeply relatable sentiment from a Reddit discussion on nihilism that just hit the nail on the head. A user wrote, "Awareness doesn't free us. It strips away the stories that once made life tolerable and leaves nothing in their place." Wow, that existential dread you might be feeling when you self-reflect, it is completely valid, because honestly, seeking clarity often feels exactly like losing the comforting illusions of ignorance. All right, moving right along to Section 1, the cost of ignorance. So, if gaining self-awareness hurts so much and strips away our favorite comforting stories, why do we even bother? Why not just stay blissfully in the dark? Well, because lacking awareness has a massive, tangible cost in the real world. Educator Scott Schemmel shares this brilliant little anecdote about this. He recalls a time he was being sarcastic, just trying to be funny, right? And his friend turned to him and snapped, "Why do you always have to be so critical all the time?" Schimmel notes that in that moment, self-awareness felt like an absolute slap in the face. But he points out something crucial. People who completely lack self-awareness are incredibly difficult to be in a relationship with. And honestly, worse than that, without it, you can end up wasting years of your life and a ton of money living out someone else's agenda. You basically end up playing a background character in someone else's story rather than writing your own. Which brings us to Section 2, the self-absorption paradox. For the longest time, clinical psychologists were scratching their heads over this really strange trap that highly self-aware people kept falling into. They call it the self-absorption paradox. It's this contradictory association where higher levels of self-awareness actually correlate with both psychological well-being and psychological distress, like depression and anxiety, at the exact same time. In theory, if you know yourself better, you should be well-adjusted, right? You know what you want. But researchers consistently found that the people who spent the most time analyzing their inner thoughts were also the ones struggling the hardest. So how can someone simultaneously be happy and deeply dysfunctional? Well, the dark side of this paradox kicks in when self-attention becomes totally inflexible. It devolves into this destructive, endless loop. Psychologist Rick Ingram proposed that self-attention actually becomes pathological when it's chronic and rigid. When a person just cannot shift out of a highly self-focused state and they become hyper-fixated on perceived threats or flaws, they aren't gaining profound wisdom, they're just trapped in a mirror, completely unable to look away. That leads us perfectly into Section 3, reflection versus rumination. Okay, so how did the field of psychology actually untangle this massive contradiction? Historically, they used tools like the self-consciousness scale, which relied on super ambiguous statements like, "I reflect about myself a lot." But researchers Paul Trapnell and Jennifer Campbell realized, wait a minute, that could mean two entirely different things. So they developed a new dual-focused model that splits introspection into two distinct categories, based entirely on why you are looking inward. And the absolute key difference here? It's all about motivation. On one hand, you have self-reflection. This is driven by epistemic curiosity. You're just genuinely fascinated by your inner self. It's flexible, and it naturally leads to better mental health and empathy. But on the other hand, you have self-rumination. This is driven by fear and self-doubt. It's an anxious, highly inflexible attention paid to the self, where you just keep replaying past mistakes over and over. Rumination leads straight down the path to depression and anxiety. So both processes involve looking inward, but one is a powerful tool for growth, and the other, it's practically a cage. Let's dive into Section 4, the pain of true clarity. Now, you might be wondering, if healthy reflection is so great for us, why is it so incredibly hard to actually do? Why do our brains just naturally resist it and slip so easily back into anxious rumination or, totally avoiding the issue? Well, it all comes down to what psychologist Cordelia Fine calls our vain brain. Our brains are literally wired to go to amazing lengths just to protect our egos. We naturally want to believe we're above average, and we constantly misinterpret our successes as purely our own doing. Confronting our actual, non-conscious truths is inherently painful. Genuine self-knowledge comes with a very high price tag, and a lot of times our brains just decide the benefits aren't worth the pain of taking a real, honest look in the mirror. All right, let's switch gears a bit for Section 5, How Machines Learn Awareness. This is where the explainer takes a really mind-blowing turn, because it turns out cutting-edge artificial intelligence actually requires the exact same painful feedback mechanisms that we do to function properly. To align large language models with complex goals, engineers use something called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. Now, in early versions, this was strictly an offline process, but today they use an online loop where the AI is constantly self-critiquing and refining its outputs based on dynamic, real-time feedback. Without this continuous self-correction, AI models will actually engage in what's called reward hacking, basically finding lazy, totally flawed ways to achieve high scores without actually doing the real work. Sound like any humans, you know? Think about the difference in how adaptable these systems are. An AI stuck in offline fine-tuning is learning from a fixed, static dataset. It's stagnant. It can't adapt to real-world complexities. Honestly, it's exactly like a human trapped in rigid, inflexible rumination, just replaying the exact same fixed data over and over again in their head. But online RL loops, they use dynamic feedback and iterative updates. This perfectly mirrors healthy, adaptable human self-reflection. It's learning, growing, and adjusting on demand. But here's the catch, and this is super important. If an AI updates way too fast based on that feedback, the whole system destabilizes and literally breaks down. To fix this, engineers use something called KL regularization. Think of it as a mathematical penalty that ensures the model only makes small, stable updates, keeping the new version relatively close to its original self. This is profoundly human. When we receive harsh, critical feedback, if we try to overhaul our entire identity overnight, we crash. We experience an existential breakdown. We absolutely need paced, flexible adjustments to our self-concept if we want to grow safely. Let's wrap this all together in Section 6, Making Awareness Work. So, what does this all mean for us? How do we build our own healthy, dynamic, KL-regularized online loop for the human mind? Leadership expert Sarah Canaday offers 4 incredibly practical steps to actively practice healthy self-reflection. Number 1, look in the mirror. Really challenge your baseline assumptions about your own strengths. Number 2, seek objective feedback from others. Don't just rely on your own vain brain to tell you how great you are. Number 3, actually do something with that feedback. Change your habits. And finally, number 4, conduct a progress report. Go back and ask others if your new behaviors are actually working. This step-by-step process ensures we are constantly adapting to feedback out on the real world, rather than just endlessly ruminating on it alone in our bedrooms. Ultimately, the journey of self-awareness isn't some final destination where you just unlock perfect, unending happiness. It's an active and, yes, sometimes really uncomfortable, continuous loop of seeking feedback, adapting, and growing. It requires giving up the comfortable illusion of who you think you are so you can discover who you actually have the potential to be. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. Are you willing to trade the comfort of ignorance for the complex, continuous loop of true growth? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks a whole new level of curiosity about the mechanics of your own mind. See you next time.